I've told this story maybe 4 times in my whole life. Not because it's a secret, more because every time I try, I get to the part where the line went slack and my throat closes up and people think I'm being dramatic. I'm not, you'd understand if you were there. So let me start it properly this time. It was the summer. The whole country felt like it was sitting inside an oven. You probably remember it if you're English. The grass at Windsor had gone the color of dry toast. The papers kept printing maps with red blobs all over them. And we were standing out there in full kit, bearskins and all, doing what we always do, which is stand still and let the world look at us. People don't realize what that's like. The tunic alone weighs more than you'd guess. The cap adds a good 1.5 kilos on top of your skull, and on a day like that when it's like balancing a hot dog on your head while somebody slowly turns the sun up, you learn to breathe shallow. You learn to lock your knees just enough to hold and not enough to faint, because if you lock them all the way the blood pools and down you go, and there's always some lad filming it for the internet. That day I was posted up near the Long Walk side, not the main gate, a bit further out where the crowd's thin and the chestnut trees give you a stripe of shade if you stand in exactly the right spot. I wasn't standing in the right spot. The shade had moved an hour ago and I hadn't because we don't. There was a couple from somewhere in the Midlands taking photos. A dad holding a toddler up so she could see me, telling her I wasn't allowed to laugh. She tried very hard to make me laugh. She had a little plastic crown on, the cheap kind from the gift stalls, and she kept tipping it at me like she was knighting me from 20 feet away. I'll be honest, I nearly broke. You're not supposed to, but she was about 3 and she'd lost a front tooth and she was so pleased with herself. I held it together, just. And there was the woman. I noticed her the way you notice things when you've got nothing to do but notice. She was older, 70s I'd guess, though I'm rubbish at ages. Cream cardigan in that heat, which should have been my first clue, but old folk feel the cold different. She had one of those wheeled shopping trolleys, tartan pattern, and a sun hat that had seen better days. She was sat on the low wall across from my post, fanning herself with a folded map of the grounds. I clocked her because she kept looking at me, not the way tourists look. They look and then they move on, they've got the photo, job done. She kept looking back like she was deciding something. After a while she got up and came over slow and stopped a polite distance away. Closer than most dare but not close enough to get a telling off. And she said quietly, not to be cheeky, just talking, "My Arthur did this, years back, Coldstream. He used to say the trick was to think about something boring on purpose. Now we're not meant to answer, you know that." Eyes front, jaw set, your furniture with a pulse, so I didn't say anything, but she saw me hear her. I made sure of it, just a flicker. And she smiled like that was enough, and she said, "He passed in the spring. I just wanted to come and look at the uniform again." And then she went and sat back down on her wall. I want you to hold on to her, because in about an hour she was going to be hanging in the air over 100 screaming people with a steel cable across her chest, and I was going to be the only one stupid enough to run toward her instead of away. But I'm getting ahead. The morning had been ordinary. That's the thing nobody tells you about the days that go wrong. They start the same as the days that don't. Same brew before the off, same lad moaning about his blisters, same sergeant doing his rounds with a face like a wet weekend. We'd had the heat warnings. They put extra water points out for the public, and there were St. John ambulance folk dotted about in their green, fanning themselves same as everyone. There'd been a couple of faints already in the crowd by midday. Normal for that summer. People came out in flip-flops and no hat and stood in the sun for 3 hours and then wondered why the world went sideways. So when I heard the first commotion, my honest first thought was, here we go, another one's gone over. It came from down the slope past where the woman was sitting, a sort of ripple in the crowd. You feel it before you hear it, people turning the same direction, that little intake of breath that runs through a group of strangers all at once. Then a man's voice, sharp, "She's not breathing right, she's not, somebody help, she's not right." And then I saw it was her, the woman in the cream cardigan. She'd slid off the wall and was on the ground, half propped against it, and her sun hat had come off and rolled away and nobody had picked it up, which is a daft thing to remember, but I do. The St. John pair were on her fast, I'll give them that. They moved like they'd trained for exactly this, because they had. One of them dropped to his knees beside her and the other was already on the radio. A little space cleared around her the way it does, that ring of people who want to help and don't know how, so they just stand and make it worse by being there. I stayed where I was. That's the part people don't get. I stayed at my post, because that's the job. You don't break for a feint. The St. John folk have it. You hold the line and you let the professionals do the professional thing, and you stand there feeling like a coward in a costume while a woman who liked your uniform goes gray on the grass 40 feet away. I watched the green coat doing chest compressions. I counted them without meaning to. I watched him tilt his head and listen and then start again harder. And I knew the way you know things in your gut before your brain catches up that this wasn't a feint. A faint, you come round, you've all seen it. They sit you up, give you water, you're embarrassed, off you go. This wasn't that, her color was wrong. The compressions weren't a precaution, they were the whole game. The radio chatter started up properly then. I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear the shape of it that clipped urgent back and forth. And one of the green coats stood up and turned in a full circle, looking up, and that's when I understood what they were asking for. They were asking for the helicopter. Now you have to picture the geography. We were a long way from any road a vehicle could use. The crowds had packed in thick that day, thousands of them all funneled along the walkways, and the lanes the ambulances would normally use were jammed solid with people who'd parked anywhere and walked. To get a road ambulance to where she was lying, somebody would have had to part a crowd the size of a football match. Minutes. Lots of minutes. And the green coat doing the compressions didn't have minutes. He had what was in his arms and a radio and a sky. So they called the air ambulance. I heard it before I saw it. Everyone did. That deep thudding you feel in your chest before your ears even sorted into a sound. The whole crowd went quiet and then noisy all at once, that excited fright noise people make, and 1,000 phones came up like a field of little glass flowers turning to the sun. The helicopter came in low over the trees, yellow and red, big, much bigger than it looks in the sky when it's actually coming down at you. The downdraft hit before it landed. Hats went. Maps, leaflets, a man's straw trilby cartwheeling across the grass. The chestnut trees thrashed about like they were trying to get away. Couldn't land near her. No room. It sat down on the open ground further along the bit of lawn they keep clear, and even getting there meant the green coats and the crew had a stretch of packed crowd to fight through. And I remember thinking as the rotors wound down to that heavy idle, that this was going to be a very long few minutes for everyone who loved that woman, wherever they were, whoever they were, even though right then it was just me who knew she'd had a husband called Arthur in the Coldstream. That's part one. I need to stop a second before I tell you the rest, because the next bit is the bit my throat does the thing about. Right, the helicopter's down. The crew are out. 2 of them in flight suits, helmets, the lot, moving fast with kit bags, and the crowd does that thing again where it wants to help and just gets in the way, and now there's police on it too, the ones who'd been blending in, suddenly visible, arms out, moving people back. Stand back please, give them room, stand right back. I was still at my post. I want to be honest about that. I hadn't moved an inch. Every cell in my body wanted to, and I hadn't, because 40 feet to my left a sergeant was watching, and to my right was everything I'd been trained to be, and you don't break. They got to her. The flight crew in the green coats huddled over her in a tight knot, and I lost sight of what they were doing, just backs and elbows and somebody calling for a bag, calling for something I couldn't hear. And then the knot opened up and I saw they'd got her onto a stretcher. Not a wheelie one. The proper kind for moving someone who can't be jostled, a rigid scoop with straps, the kind that turns a person into cargo, because that's the only way to keep them alive while you move them. And here's where the trouble started, and I've thought about it about 10,000 times since, and I still don't fully understand the why of it, only the what. They couldn't carry her to the helicopter. I told you the ground was packed. There was a low railing between where she lay and the open lawn, decorative iron stuff, and beyond it the slope was crammed shoulder to shoulder with people who could not move because there was nowhere to move to. You can't carry a rigid stretcher at a run through a crowd that thick. You drop her, you trip. So somebody made a call, and I learned afterward it was the right call, the brave call, even though from where I stood it looked like the start of a nightmare. They were going to lift her out. From above. The helicopter would come back up, hover, and they'd winch the stretcher up to it over the railing and the heads of the crowd, straight up and out, because up was the only direction that wasn't full of people. I'd seen this on the telly. Sea rescues, cliffs, that sort of thing. I'd never seen it 20 meters from my own face with a woman I'd nodded at an hour before. The crowd got pushed back as far as it would go, which wasn't far. The police made a clearing, a rough circle under the spot where the aircraft would hover, and into that circle they brought the stretcher and laid it down, and a crewman clipped the lines on, checking, double-checking. You could see him tugging at things, his lips moving, going through it. The other crewman was back at the aircraft. It lifted. The downdraft came again, worse this time because it was closer, and people screamed and laughed in that horrible mix. And bits of grass and grit stung the side of my face, and I never flinched because I'm trained not to, and what a stupid, useless thing to be proud of in that moment. The line came down, the crewman caught it, clipped it to the stretcher harness, gave the signal, and the stretcher came up off the grass. It rose slow at first, steady. The woman in it strapped down tight, a green coat's hand following her up as far as he could reach and then letting go, up past the railing, up past the first heads. The whole crowd had gone silent now, that proper silence, thousands of people holding one breath together, every phone up, and the only sound in the world was that engine hammering the air. She got maybe 40 feet up, swaying. A stretcher on a line always swings a bit, it's physics, you can't help it. The crewman up top was leaning out, reaching for her, ready to swing her in. And then the wind came. I don't know where from. A heatwave gust, the kind that comes from nowhere on a still day, rolls off the warm ground and just shoves. It hit the helicopter and it hit the stretcher and the whole thing lurched. The aircraft tipped and corrected and the line snapped taut and then went loose and then taut again and the stretcher swung out wide, way out over the heads of the crowd, and the woman in it swung with it like the clapper of a bell. People scattered as much as they could. There was a surge backwards, that animal panic, and somewhere a child started screaming and didn't stop. And then the stretcher dropped. Not all the way. I need you to hear that because the moment it happened nobody knew it wasn't all the way, including me. The line paid out fast, 6 feet, 8 feet, the winch reacting to the lurch, the aircraft trying to climb away from its own swinging weight, and from the ground it looked exactly like the thing you pray you'll never see. It looked like she was falling. A woman in a cream cardigan strapped to a board, dropping out of the sky over 100 people with nowhere to go. That's the bit in the title, isn't it? That's the bit that makes you click. They dropped her from the helicopter. And I'm telling you, for about 2 seconds that I have lived inside of for years, that is exactly what your eyes told you was happening. And here's the thing I've never been able to explain to the people who weren't there. I didn't decide to move. I want to claim it. I'd love to tell you I made some noble choice, weighed my duty against her life and chose her. I didn't. There wasn't a choice. My body was over the railing and into the cleared circle before my brain had finished telling me it was a terrible idea. The bearskin came off, I think I threw it. I don't actually remember, and I was running flat out across that grass toward the place under the swinging stretcher, and behind me I could hear my sergeant's voice, and I'll tell you what he was shouting because it's not what you'd think. He wasn't shouting at me to stop. He was running too. 3 of us, me and the sergeant and a copper whose name I never got, all of us converging on the same patch of trampled grass under that dropping stretcher, all of us with our arms up, all of us doing the maths every man does in that half second, which is, she is going to come down and I am going to be under her, and that is just how it is. The line caught. The winch caught her. Whatever clever bit of engineering is built into those things, it bit, and the drop stopped, and the stretcher jerked hard and swung again, lower now, low enough that the bottom of it clipped the top of the cleared circle, low enough that when it came swinging through I got both arms around the foot of it, and the sergeant got the side and the copper got the other side, and the 3 of us just held on and let our own weight drag it down out of the swing. She came down into our arms, not gently, nothing about it was gentle. The edge of the scoop caught me across the collarbone, and I've still got the little knot of bone there where it never set quite right, but she came down into hands instead of grass, 3 pairs of them. And the crewman up top was screaming into his mic, and the aircraft was climbing away to ease the line, and we got her flat. We got the stretcher flat on the ground, and the green coats were on her again in a heartbeat. And I stood up and stepped back because I'd done my bit and the rest wasn't mine to do. Here's what I didn't know, standing there with grass stains on my whites and my collarbone singing and my bearskin lying upside down 20 feet away like a dead animal. She was alive. Not just survived the drop alive. The drop, it turned out, was the least of her troubles. The thing the green coat had been fighting on the grass, the thing the compressions were for, her heart had stopped, properly stopped, and somewhere in all that chaos, the lift, the lurch, the drop, the catch, one of those crewmen had still been working on her, through all of it. Strapped to a board swinging through the sky, and a man in a flight suit leaning over her doing what he could because that's the job, the same way standing still as mine. And on the ground, with us holding the stretcher steady, they shocked her. I saw it, the little jolt of her whole body. And then the green coat looked at his monitor and looked at the other one and said a word I'll never forget, just one word, flat and disbelieving and full of everything. Back. She was back. They had her in the aircraft inside 2 minutes after that. Carried this time, the crowd parted by a wall of police and, I'm told, a fair few members of the public who'd snapped out of the panic and made themselves useful. The rotors wound up, the downdraft flattened the grass one last time, and the whole thing lifted off and tipped its nose and was gone over the chestnut trees, and the noise faded. And then it was just a field full of people standing in the ringing, quiet, not quite able to believe what they'd watched. Somebody started clapping. I don't know who. 1 person, then 10, then all of them, this great rolling wave of applause across thousands of people, and it wasn't for me, I want to be clear. It was for her, for the crew, for the green coats, for the simple, unbelievable fact that a woman who'd been dead on the grass was now alive in the sky. But I was standing in the middle of it, and for a minute it washed over me too, and I just let it, grass stains and all. My sergeant came and stood next to me. Big man never says much. He looked at the helicopter getting smaller and he looked at me and he said, "You left your post." And I said, "Yes, sergeant." And he nodded for a long time looking at the sky and then he said, "So did I," and that was the whole conversation. That was the last we ever spoke of it, him and me. Some things don't need a debrief. The little girl with the plastic crown found her dad in the crowd. I saw them after, her face all blotchy from crying, the crown gone crooked. He was holding her tight. I gave her a little nod, the one I wouldn't give her earlier when she was trying to make me laugh, and she gave me a wobbly smile back, and I think that nod cost me more than the whole rescue did. Don't ask me to explain that. I found out the rest over the following weeks, in pieces the way you do. Her name was Nora. Nora, who'd told me her Arthur had been Coldstream and had passed in the spring and she'd just come to look at the uniform one more time. Her heart had given out on a hot wall on a hot day in the place that reminded her of her husband. And the chain of strangers it took to keep her in the world that afternoon, the man who shouted, the green coats who knelt, the pilots, the crewman who didn't stop working even while she swung through open air, the sergeant, the copper whose name I never learned, none of them knew her. Not one. They did it because she was a person and she was falling, and that was enough. She wrote to the regiment, months later when she was well enough. A proper letter, blue ink, lovely handwriting. They read bits of it out to us. She said she didn't remember any of it, not the wall, not the helicopter, none of it, which I think is a mercy. She said the last thing she remembered was a young guardsman who wasn't allowed to talk to her but who heard her anyway and let her know he'd heard. And she said she thought about Arthur and how he'd have liked that. How he'd have said the trick was to think about something boring on purpose, and how I clearly hadn't that day, thank God. She asked in the letter if she could come back, just to look at the uniform, same as before. She did the next summer. I was off duty but I came in anyway in civvies and stood in the crowd like everyone else, and watched her sit on that same low wall with a fresh tartan trolley and a new sun hat, fanning herself with a folded map. She didn't know me out of the kit, why would she? I didn't go over. I just watched her watch the guard for a while, an old woman in the sun thinking about her Arthur, alive and ordinary and there, and then I went home. People ask me what the shocking part was. The title says everyone was shocked, and they were when she dropped, but that's not the part that gets me. The drop was just a few bad seconds of physics and wind. The shocking part, the part I still can't get over, is that a field full of strangers who'd come to take photos and eat ice cream looked up and saw someone falling, and instead of filming it, 3 of us ran underneath. And we weren't special. That's the thing, anyone would have, I truly believe that now, you'd have run too. That's why I still wear it, the uniform. The daft heavy hat, all of it, standing in the heat being furniture with a pulse. Because every single one of those people walking past thinks we're just for show. And 99 days out of 100 they're right. But there's always the 100th day. And on the 100th day you find out the standing still was never really the point. It was only ever about being there, so that when somebody falls out of the sky, there's a man underneath who won't move until it counts and then moves the second it does. Nora's gone now, peacefully in her own bed, a good few years on from that afternoon. With her Arthur again, I'd like to think, if you believe in that sort of thing, and some days I do. I kept the letter. I think about something boring on purpose most days, it still doesn't work.